So, good morning and welcome to this Cambridge Marketing College webinar. My name is Neil Wilkins. I'm one of the tutors at the college. And in this session today, we are going to explore responsible messaging in social media. We're going to focus on social media because, of course, for a lot of us, this is one of the key ways that we are connecting and engaging with our audiences. But a lot of the things that we're going to cover are just good marketing and communications practice. And we are looking to really extend out this idea of responsible messaging. We can all communicate, we're all in conversations and promoting and doing stuff with our customers and other stakeholders, but doing it responsibly, doing it in the right kind of way is the focus of this session. So what we're going to be focusing on here is we're going to be looking at how to build trust, stay ethical, and create some really lasting impact, the right kind of impact through the content that we produce. So a structure typically follows your usual format of clear, practical, research-informed, and really kind of guiding the principles, if you like, of sustaining a really consistent message in everything that you do. So this is going to be really feeding into what you're currently doing. So whether you're early in your career, whether you're working as an apprentice, whether you are a strategic marketer with many, many years of experience, the principles that we're talking about here are going to be consistently moving the game forward versus the other people and other brands and other businesses that your customers could otherwise be engaging with. So we're going to be looking at ethical strategies here for engaging in a trustful and long-term brand building way. This is a really important thing. This is going to hit the mark for both tactical stuff that you're going to do today, maybe later today, even this afternoon, as well as building your brand propositions and messages into the future. So the objectives that I'm going to set for us as we go through some of these ways of thinking are going to be that we're going to understand some of the principles of responsible messaging. And as I say, particularly within social media, which is one of the most overt channels that we have available to us. We're going to apply some of the best global practices currently that I would say for ethical content creation. So doing almost the right kind of checklists as we're producing our content. We're going to use some trusted models to guide inclusivity and transparent communication. There's some kind of buzzwords in here that I'm using, but I'm using them intentionally. So if you're actually studying this stuff, it's going to relate to the materials that you're reading and watching. But if this is something that is a more practical approach that you're looking to take, hopefully some of these things will ring true as well. We are going to, as any webinar like this should, identify and hopefully help you to avoid some common social media missteps or some of the things that you might just sort of fall into those little sticky traps and almost be replicating, not good practice. And a lot of the time you will see this play out with your competitors and other organizations maybe in your sector. So we'll let them carry on doing it and you become the responsible brand. And we're going to build some content plans that will align with your brand values. So when we talk about responsible marketing, it isn't about necessarily a revolution for your brand or a brand refresh or even a brand rebrand. What we're looking at here is to evolve your brand communications with your brand's values. So kind of just fine tuning. If you can imagine a dashboard with a number of little dials that you can just fine tune up or down in various areas. Probably for most of us, that's what we're looking to do. So this isn't something that is going to change everything, but in many ways it will change everything in terms of the outcomes. So why does responsible messaging matter? What, in other words, really why you're here listening to this? Well, it is absolutely critical. Being responsible as a marketer, communicator, PR, content creator really, really matters. And so social media really, in essence, is a reflection of your brand's values. It enables and helps people to really understand what you stand for. Now, for most of us, we are going to be targeted and have goals and objectives set that are sell this product, push and promote this, push this. But actually, if you think about the phrase social media, it is so much deeper. This is not an advertising platform. Well, it is for most brands, or at least it's perceived as that. But what we're looking at here is really focusing in on that word social, because It shouldn't just be a promotional platform. You should be thinking of social networks as channels through which you can reflect your brand's values, storytell, create a narrative that engages. And then if there happens to be some kind of transaction, some kind of push or product or service sale at the end of it, then great. But this is so much deeper and so much more and sustainably more than that. Now, of course, as we know, audiences are becoming ever more discerning, ever more vocal, and definitely ever more socially aware than they have ever been. This is I wouldn't say it's quicksand, but it is a very kind of fragile ecosystem. Trust is fragile. One minute, a customer loves you, you do one thing that's out of step with what they're perceiving as valuable, and you've lost them. It is a very fragile thing. So we have to be careful. One misstep can damage your reputation, it can damage the reach, or it can enhance the reach, but in the wrong kind of way. So, an ethical marketing, a responsible marketing approach will build long term brand equity and your customers' loyalty, no matter almost what you do. So, you can almost afford to be vulnerable. You can afford to make those little, almost sort of insignificant mistakes, knowing that your customers trust you, they really kind of buy into what you're doing, and they're very loyal to you. So, this stuff is really important. The Edelman Trust Barometer in 2024 said 71% of consumers say brand trust is a major factor in their purchase decisions. So we're not just making this stuff up. What we're saying is that trust is at the absolute core of at least two-thirds of your customers when they're making decisions as to whether or not to go with you. It's that important. So we cannot ignore it. We have to take this stuff seriously. So, what is responsible messaging and how does it play out in social media? Well, it includes a whole bunch of stuff that you need to really be thinking about. And I would say that this is probably one of our first kind of, well, let's call it a checklist of things to think about the next time you publish something in social media. What you need to think is it honest and accurate? Now, I don't just mean, is it honest? Okay, yeah, we kind of believe it. Or is it kind of accurate? Well, we think so. Can't really back it up. When we say honest and accurate, we mean you've actually got evidence to back it up. So if challenged, not just by a customer, but in a court of law, could you provide evidence that said, we've said this, and here's the evidence behind it? In other words, here's the foundation for this piece of content. It isn't just this woolly, wishy-washy thing at the top where it sort of says, oh, we're really great, or oh, this is the number one product in the market kind of thing. You've actually got some tangible data behind it. It's honest and it's accurate. There also needs to be a check of, is it respectful for diversity and inclusion? In other words, are you, just by the nature of what you say and how you say it, are you excluding audiences from this? Now, you could argue, well, hold on a minute, Neil, this is kind of against marketing principles, which are all about targeting and segmenting and actually not making stuff, fully available to everyone because our product or service isn't really relevant to everyone. That's a different story. That's a different conversation. What we're saying here is, are you respecting diversity and inclusion? Even when you're segmenting your product or service. So it's this kind of fine balance. We'll cover this in a little bit more detail a bit later. Are you protecting privacy and data? In other words, if in the conversation you are having within social media, you are not protecting the privacy of certain elements of that conversation. In other words, if you're saying, okay, in social media, here's a grabber for you. If you come in, if you sign up for this, we will give you X, Y, or Z. It's not that kind of danger, if you like, if you're actually collecting people's data or information, and then you're just kind of like holding it in an insecure way, or you're kind of then almost releasing into the wild who signed up for such and such. Actually, it's about really thinking through. If we're asking people to give us something, we have to really be respectful and mindful of what we're going to do with that data and information, how we're going to store it, and also publicly how we are going to interact with those people. Because, of course, the clue is in the name, social media. There's also a thing coming in here which responsible messaging and marketing talks about, which is transparency. This is being transparent about any partnerships, sponsorships, or intentions that you have with your content. So if this is promotional content, make it really clear and obvious. We are promoting this thing because we'd like you to buy it. You obviously wouldn't say it in those terms, but that's the ethos really behind responsible messaging. Don't try and dress something up to be something that it isn't. That's absolutely key. We've seen a lot of cases, and I'll talk about a couple of these a little bit later, where brands have been kind of covertly, not overtly, but covertly pushing products into a particular social environment. And it's kind of product placement, but done in a really ugly, covert way. If you're doing product placement, that is fine, as long as you declare it, as long as you're really transparent. We would love you to try this product or this service. Here it is, look, we're going to put it in this context. Give it a go. I mean, that is totally different to, hey, we're just going to have this on the corner of the screen. And if you notice it, oh, that's handy for us because we don't really want to push the fact we're trying to promote it. But that's not responsible messaging. So, what you're needing to do is think about this honesty and accuracy, respect for diversity and inclusion, protection of privacy and data, and transparency with what you are trying to do. And align those things with your organization's social, environmental, and ethical commitments. The CIM's responsible marketing framework comes through loud and clear here. You know, there are models and frameworks available to help you do this stuff, but at a very high level, it's about doing mindful messaging, doing mindful marketing. And you know this stuff's true. You know this stuff's right because it just feels right. If you get any kind of inkling or intuitively feel, not so sure about this post, or I'm not so sure about the way this campaign's going, that is a surefire sign something's not right. You'll know this. You don't necessarily even have to go through the checklist. If it doesn't feel right, there's a reason why it doesn't feel right. And if it doesn't feel right to you, the market and your customer are going to tell you very, very quickly. So there are some models. We've got three foundations of ethical social content that really talk in a little bit more detail about this transparency, inclusivity, and authenticity. So transparency, let's go a bit deeper here. This is disclosing sponsored content, intentions, and affiliations. So if you're doing stuff in partnership or you're working with an influencer, keep this stuff transparent. People don't mind. They're willing to consume the things. We don't have to hide anything. All right, if there's something that's commercially sensitive, well, I would argue, why are you doing that in socials anyway? But you know, if you take the principle of if I can make everything transparent, I become the good guy in the sector. I become the good guy in this market. And that's a good thing, particularly in social media. Inclusivity, what we're meaning here directly, is avoiding stereotypes, avoiding bias, and being exclusive of language or visuals. So actually taking sort of, you know, a particular position or particular stance in your sector that actually biases how your product or service is perceived towards a particular audience. Now, it's not to say you cannot do profiling. It's not to say you cannot do segmentation. It's not to say you shouldn't be building personas, because, of course, those are your targets ultimately. But what we need to make sure is that if somebody else outside of that kind of target is interested, then they're not excluded. This is really important because you might, by doing it this way, open up a whole new marketplace, a whole new audience that otherwise you would not have got. So there's commercial reasons as well as ethical reasons for doing this. And the third thing, this authenticity, is speaking with a human tone. Now, if you've heard any of my stuff before, or you know what I'm standing for, I am a huge advocate of using AI, of working with AI, of working in collaboration with AI. So this is where there's a fine balance here. Speaking with a human tone does not mean producing AI content. I've got some absolute howlers of examples of brands, even in AI, who have clearly not got a human tone when they speak. It's clearly written by an AI. And that is not what we're talking about being authentic. It's fine to use AI. It's fine to get that support, maybe for the first couple of edits of your next post, but actually speaking with a human tone, avoiding spin, hype, or any misleading claims is this whole thing about building authenticity. Authenticity, according to Brene Brown, is more than being real. It's about being real and right. We know this is the right thing to do. So try, if you can, to remain ethical by staying in line with what feels right, with what you know to be true. And, we're all consumers. We see this in our travels as well. So it's not like we don't know what to do here. Responsible marketing is doing the right thing and not falling into the trap of, oh, well, it's quicker and easier if I do it that way. And I'll just do it because I can. That's not responsible marketing and definitely isn't responsible messaging. So taking that little bit of extra time is so, so key here. Now, I've got another little framework for you here. This one's adapted from the CIPR and Digital Marketing Institute, their social media ethics guidance. And we've kind of put this, almost the 5 Cs of responsible social media messaging. Don't we all love a few acronyms? Well, we've got 5 Cs here. We love all the marketing mix and all the P's and all that. Well, we've got some C's in this responsible marketing thing for you today. So the first one is clarity. Be clear in your intent and language. Consistency. Align with brand tone, values, and previous messaging as well. Consent. Respect any customer or user privacy and data preferences. If they ask you not to use their stuff for a certain purpose, don't do it. Community. Encourage meaningful and respectful dialogue. Come back to that one in just a moment. And correction. Be quick to apologize and correct mistakes when needed. We've seen so many examples, and you'll see them in your textbooks, you'll see them, in the media of brands who can, really, really take it on themselves to be open and honest and admit when they don't quite get it right. I saw a wonderful, just actually a few minutes before this webinar, I saw a wonderful little post by somebody who was sharing Ryanair's most recent sort of dig at themselves, where they had the interior of the inside of an aircraft, and they had some plastic garden seats instead of actual airline seats, and they said, well, kind of, I can't remember what the actual phrase was that they'd used, but it's kind of, okay, this is what you think as we value, apparently. And they were kind of doing a little kind of dig at themselves in terms of, this very, very low cost and low value budget airline kind of approach. And really were poking fun at themselves. And that's the kind of thing. It is I'm not condoning or supporting Ryanair when I say this, but it's just a great example of actually saying, guys, we know this is what you think of us. And so we'll work with that. We'll kind of do what we can, and we'll be as open and transparent and brutally honest as we can based on what you think of us. And that's a really nice way, coming back to that point 4 there of community, of encouraging meaningful, respectful dialogue. You might love a brand, you might not love a brand, but respecting a brand or the marketers or content creators behind a brand who can be honest and true and actually, yeah, just kind of almost sort of take it on the chin, as it were, when criticized, is such a powerful way of showing responsible messaging. So those would be 5 areas, I would say, those 5 Cs: clarity, consistency, consent, community, and correction, which are just lovely little kind of things that you can focus on to enable you to, yeah, just kind of really, I guess, audit what you've been doing recently and then see if there are any of these little dials you could just tune just a little bit in the next posts that you do. So here's a little checklist really that you can then sort of take into practice. And particularly if you're kind of taking this back into your team and sort of, helping them to become more responsible, and or if you're working with an agency and you want to kind of brief them on maybe a little bit of fine tuning about some of the messaging that's happening here, is you can ask these questions, and these are very specific questions. Is the message factually accurate and verifiable? In other words, could we back it up? Are the sources and sponsors clearly disclosed? Now, be really honest with yourself here. Have you been doing some stuff where you think, oh, here's my intention with this. I'm not going to actually disclose that, but, we're going to kind of push it and see whether we can get it through. That's obviously the opposite of what we're talking about here. So be really, really honest with yourself. Is it inclusive in language and imagery? Now, what I'm not encouraging you to do is go really, really full on so that the stuff you do becomes so generic and so vanilla flavored that you look and sound exactly like the brand next door just because they're doing the same thing because they feel they've got to do this too. This whole inclusivity thing is a really sensitive topic. It is something I've covered in previous webinars, and so you can kind of track back through the colleges series or track me down on my podcast or in YouTube and actually look at some of this inclusivity stuff because it is really important to strike the right kind of balance. We're not here just to talk about this one today, but there's a lot of kind of thinking, a lot of research into this. But what I'm wanting you to do here is to think about the language and the imagery and conveying something that doesn't actually restrict access to what you're doing to certain individuals. So think about those individuals. How do they perceive it? Rather than it being, we've got to appeal to everybody. I am not 100% saying we've got to appeal to everybody. That's not what inclusivity is. What it's doing is it's saying, this is our target, but if you're interested too, welcome. That's a nice kind of nuanced balance there. So it's a sensitive one. It's a very fine line. You might have to play with that, but it's really important. Another checklist item is, could it be your message misinterpreted or cause unintended harm? Now, probably the unintended harm one, unless you've got a very sensitive product or service, is unlikely. But actually, the misinterpretation is key here. Do a check on, and you can do split testing, A/B testing on particular posts here, and just check how, in plain English terms, or if you're translating into other languages, obviously take that into the other languages, but in terms of plain, straightforward, simple language, is your message able to be misinterpreted? Because the most simple, the most poignant, the most productive messages are the ones that can't really be misinterpreted. They are what they are. It does what it says on the tin. That is absolutely what we're trying to get here. And of course, at the same time, final point on the checklist, is the message aligned with your brand's purpose and tone of voice? It's got to still be in alignment, because the trouble is, if there are a number of you and or you've got an agency, everybody's going to go off in different directions, trying to be responsible, trying to do their own thing. And you're going to have so many different versions of what you're doing. It's going to be confusing, both for you, but also for the customer. So this is about alignment as well. So all these things are good things, important things, actually essential things to do. But if you've got others producing content, particularly in social media, make sure everybody buys into a consistent same story. And that, as I say, does include your agency as well. Now, you could choose not to do any of this. You could listen to this and think, okay, Neil, yeah, I kind of get it. It's probably the right thing to do, but actually, I'm just going to carry on doing what I do. You will then, I will guarantee you, because I see it all the time, fall into one of the nasty little pits that are going to be very, very hard to get out of. So here are some common pitfalls to avoid. Speaking on issues without action, something you'll see called performance activism, but just basically talking about stuff or aligning yourself with causes or sort of crusades that you actually don't really know very much about. That you actually don't have any evidence you can back up that you were actually really involved in, and just kind of really trying to piggyback on stuff that's irrelevant, you will get spotted. So when we talk about being authentic and being true and honest, you've got to do it in a way that actually backs up the brand principles, the brand values, and your higher purpose. This is a much bigger thing than just, is that message good because it piggybacks on a trending hashtag or a trending topic that actually everyone's talking about, so let's get ours in there. Again, the textbooks will show you lots of examples where brands have got that tragically wrong. And one or two of them that you'll see will be brands that we don't actually have around today. And this is why, because they're trying to stretch this beyond the natural boundary of what they should be talking about. The next one is making unsubstantiated claims. Now, you'll see this called virtue signaling, or the more common term, greenwashing. So if you can back up everything that you say, be it your carbon footprint credentials or the way that your brand or product or service works, if you can back that up with a bit of science, with some numbers, with data, with evidence, then you're fine. You can say whatever you like, really, if you've got the evidence to back it up. But unsubstantiated claims are the surefire way of getting this stuff wrong. So make sure, and particularly if you're not responsible for your products or services, you are just purely the communications team and you don't look after products, make sure that every time your product manager comes across and says, can you promote this for me? Or can you share this one? Or can we launch this? You get the backup data that goes alongside the claims that you're making. Then you're protected. Then you've done due diligence. Then you are a responsible marketer. Posting irrelevant or upbeat content during global crises. Insensitive scheduling is what this is called. And of course, we can all fall into this trap, not being sensitive to the sensitive stuff. If the world is not feeling good, don't go in all guns blazing. If we are in an economic crisis, do not say, hey, here's a way to invest your money or whatever it is. Be really sensitive to the emotions that are going on. We call this macro analysis in the widest sense. So think about politically, economically, social, technological, legal, environmental, and there are probably more that you could add into that list. But those big picture things, make sure there's a sensitivity to what you're posting that relates to how the world is feeling, and particularly at a more micro level, how your target audience is feeling and how they're acting and things that are going on, and schedule and post relevant content in that kind of context. Fake urgency, hidden sponsorships, manipulative calls to action, these are called misleading engagement tactics. So if you are saying, and we often see this, don't we? Do you know the last time you booked a flight, for example, or if you go to one of the hotel booking platforms and you're looking on there, it's like, oh, only 2 seats left at this price, or and there are other transport forms as well. If I say one, then you'll know who I'm talking about. So I'm not going to highlight a particular brand here, but you'll know who we're talking about here. There are certain platforms where there's a real kind of sense of you're going to miss out here. So FOMO comes into play if you don't commit now. Now, if it's true, if the urgency is actually true, because you do only have 2 tickets left, or there is only a small amount of product left that you can send out, then absolutely fine. But of course, that comes back to having a substantiated claim. If you don't, and you're just doing it to fake some urgency or to just get your sales over the line because your boss is pushing you for, come on, we need a bit more engagement, or come on, we've got these boxes to shift this month. So you manipulate, then that is not responsible messaging. And if you want to go deeper into that one, and particularly if you are pressurized into doing more promotional stuff through something called social media, remember I'm pushing this whole thing of social, it's about community and conversation, not just promotion, then look at the ASA ad guidelines on social responsibility because they give you a lot more detail, a lot more evidence will hopefully back up if you have to push back on some of these things because of pressures that come through the business. You know it's the right thing to do, but you need the evidence behind you to support you. So I get that. I really understand it. So, what kinds of things can you do to support you? What kind of tools are out there to support you with responsible messaging? Well, if you want to be doing sort of alt text and accessibility checks, maybe on the imagery that you're looking at here, then you need to be thinking again, some of these things are actually available within Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. They all support alt text for visuals. So if you are doing some correct and appropriate naming of your imagery, for example. I often fall into the trap here just because of speed and I have to correct myself, go back and change it. Is I've got a little image or a thumbnail that I've just taken a quick screen grab and it comes up with screenshot 1264325.jpg and I post it with a little comment and stuff and I think, oh, I've fallen into the trap again. That is not accessible. Even though the image might look good, I'm not being a responsible marketer. The image has to be titled, it has to have alt text, it has to be appropriately labeled, if you like, behind the scenes and attributed so that it will support accessibility standards. Now, we all know that from website engagement. And of course, on your website, it will be descriptions and titles and alt text, etc. But think of the same principle for your social media too. And of course, as AI search starts to really gain traction, the AIs know. The AIs can see behind the scenes. So you do not want to fall into the trap when an AI agent comes to your image and says, hold on a minute, that's not what it says it is. Hold on, what are they faking? Because you're not even going to be in that agent's results that it presents back to its human. So this is about future-proofing yourself. You can also look at the tone checking, if you like, of your content that you're writing. So Grammarly, Writer, or Humanly will check for bias and tone, and it will look and basically audit the content that you've put into it, and it'll give you recommendations. And particularly if you're using AI in any of your content creation process, it will double check that this has that human-centric feel to it and tone of voice. And of course, you can check it back against your brand guidelines as well. Another way that you can do content approval is to use tools like Hootsuite or Sprout Social to build in approval checkpoints, because of course you don't necessarily want, or you basically can't because it's the rules of your organization, you to be the end point for the approval process for a particular post. So if you do have, maybe it's a technical sign off or technical process, build that in as well. We're not doing this in isolation as marketers. We need to involve others in the business, not to share the responsibility or the burden of getting it wrong necessarily, but just to make sure we've gathered the right evidence and we've got that backup approval if challenged, so that we can say, well, look, we've got technical approval, we've got some numbers and data behind this, we've done some inclusivity checks, we've got our tone of voice. Yes, we did use AI to get the first draft, but hey, we're humans and we've edited it. Then you are completely and utterly covered. And then what you can do, and this is again another one that's a little bit nuanced for social media, is you can then monitor the sentiment. So, in other words, when you've published this little piece, or this particular post, you can then use things like Brandwatch, Meltwater, or Talkwalker to actually monitor the sentiment of the responses. And by sentiment, what we mean, was it positive, was it neutral, or was it negative? The feedback, the comments, the engagement that you got. And of course, in an ideal world, that sentiment monitoring feeds into a social media dashboard that says, hey, look, here's our score today. This is what it was last week. And look what we've done. We've done a bit of responsible messaging checking and we've improved stuff because, look, our sentiment score, in other words, we've moved the dial up a little bit towards a more positive sentiment from our audience. So this is the feedback that you're looking to get from them. So that can be a really exciting thing to bring in. It's a true key performance indicator. So in responsible messaging, responsible marketing, mindful marketing, whatever you want to call it, sentiment monitoring is a KPI. It's a key performance indicator of how well you're progressing in the journey. Not to perfection. I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near perfect in the work that I do, even though I know this stuff, but we're on a journey of continuous improvement. So sentiment monitoring, if you don't monitor the engagement sentiment you get back, it's time to do it. It's really important. And those kind of platforms, others obviously are available, can help you to do it. So how are you going to sort of see this kind of fit into what you're doing? Now, for a number of you, I'm sure you are using things like Smart Insights Race Model. This will basically play a part at every single phase in the journey. This is not an additional thing you do. Responsible messaging is something you do within everything that you're currently doing. So if you are responsible for the entire customer journey, the entire sales pipeline, the sales pyramid, whatever you call it, or here, the race model for planning how you actually put your content out there, increasing reach, getting people to act, converting that action, and then engaging with them on an ongoing basis, the responsible messaging theories apply. So you can apply this lens to each social campaign, for example, to check for ethical alignment and the clarity of the performance that you're doing. So it's about sort of almost dovetailing this or putting this as a layer, if you like, above everything that you're currently doing. As I say, it's not an additional thing to do. It's something that you're going to do which is embedded in the stuff you're already doing. So remember that little dashboard I said with all the little dials and you're going to be tuning things up and down? That's what responsible messaging is. It's not an additional new thing. It's about improving what you already do. And it will apply across each and every one of these sections. And if you're using customer journey as a model rather than necessarily race model, it will be at acquisition or awareness. It will be at the conversion stage, and it will be at the final retention stage as you're building loyalty. It applies absolutely everywhere. And when you start to put it into the model that you use, you might be using SOSTAC, for example. So any of these are going to sort of still give you the same answer. Measuring the success of responsible messaging is going to include a number of metrics or key performance indicators if you want some guides as to how you're progressing. And these would be, I think, probably the big four, I would say, that come from almost an amalgamation of sources here. These would be, if you could only choose 3 or 4 that you were going to focus on, to me, these would be the big ones, because these are the ones that are going to show from a responsible perspective how you're progressing. You're almost certainly going to see this working out financially or commercially. You're going to sell more, you're going to get more engagement, you're going to increase the number of followers, etc., etc. We're not necessarily talking about those things specifically. This is a more subtle set of measures that really do matter because they lead on to some of those commercial goals that you've got or that you've been set. So this is the stuff that kind of is the almost the bridge between doing good messaging and marketing and actually getting some good commercial results. These are the kind of the metrics or the KPIs that sit in between. So the first one is the sentiment shift, that thing I was talking about, before versus after your campaigns. So think about measuring, how do people feel right now? And then you do your campaign with responsible messaging, and then you measure how they're feeling afterwards. If you can see there's a sentiment shift, you've made a difference. Engagement quality is the second one. The shares, the saves, the thoughtful comments, not just likes and follows. Remember, the vanity metrics are things that are kind of, you need the scale to be able to do this at scale, but these are the things that are so much more important. So with engagement quality, we're looking at shares, saves, thoughtful comments, the things that really demonstrate people are getting it, they're understanding it, they're engaging with it, and they're liking it. Not like as in ticking a like, but they're feeling emotionally connected with it. That is responsible messaging. Your brand trust score, this is a really, really important one. You can get this through surveys or feedback loops, or simply if, I mean, particularly if you're coming at this from a B2B perspective, just getting on the phone and asking your customer, did you get that? Did you see it? What did you think? How did you kind of feel about that? And maybe give them some tangible things to rate against in terms of level of trust before and after, or what's the propensity to buy now? Or kind of, are you more likely to engage with us versus the competition in the next month? Yes or no? And kind of start to build in some measures that allow you to really, really understand whether or not responsible messaging is increasing your brand trust score. You've got to set a brand trust score. A customer satisfaction score could come in here. The net promoter score, for example, NPS, that you'll certainly see in texts. And a lot of people use that as a common currency when reporting. Those kinds of things can come into play. And I would almost guarantee if you're doing responsible messaging, you'll see, if not a significant increase in a positive sense, but maybe in just a little twitch of the dial. The little dial just moves. It hasn't moved for years, but look, we've got it just twitching a little bit. Then what more can you do? Well, maybe the other thing that you can do is the fourth one on the list here, which is community growth. Maybe you will increase followers, but not just followers, it's followers and advocates. Not just reach, not just how many people did we hit with this messaging, but actually what actually happened afterwards. Did people behave differently? Did we grow our community? Did we get more conversations? This is the stuff that really matters because, as I said right at the start, this is the stuff that moves us from just being pushing stuff out there to actually brand building in the future. So, where can you start? What do you do next? There's a load of kind of ideas and thinking here. Hopefully, you're kind of still with me on this one and sort of thinking it is a good thing to do. So, what I would recommend you do in terms of a starting point, if this is something you feel is important, and I really hope you do, is to review and rewrite scheduled content using the 5 C's. Have a little kind of play with the stuff, audit the stuff you've done, maybe the last 5 tweets or the last 5 LinkedIn posts or wherever you are active. Look at them and rewrite them using the 5 Cs that we mentioned before. Second thing I would suggest is that you build a monthly messaging checklist based on brand values. So, in other words, don't just be publishing for publishing's sake, but have real purpose behind it. Third thing is to present a content audit showing inclusion gaps or bias in tone and any other kind of little opportunities you see for improvement. This is where you have to be brutally honest. This is where you might have to share, we didn't quite hit the mark, or we got it glaringly wrong, actually, when we review this based on these new standards, and they are standards, really, aren't they? If you look at that and you think, oh dear, okay, we're really off the mark here. This is a time to be strong and just own up to it. It's not an easy thing to do to actually admit you didn't quite get it right. I often have to do this to myself and say, oh, I fell into that trap again and I knew it was there. But even if I kind of look back and I think, I wasn't aware that wasn't the right thing to do, but now I know it, I can't unknow it. So this is about being brutally honest and actually, I use the word quite vulnerable, really, at this stage. But then the next point is drafting responsible responses to comments, complaints, or misinformation. In other words, starting to make an improvement, starting to take ownership and accountability for, we now know this stuff, so we've got to now take action. So that's a really key thing to do here. So the next steps really will include after that, your social media messaging, reflecting your brand values in real time. So as you start to not just publish stuff, but have engagement, start to come back with maybe answers to questions, or there's comments that have come in and you think, oh yeah, we can jump in with that. It's always doing it through a responsible messaging lens. Responsible content like this is going to bring trust, loyalty, and long-term credibility. So when you're sharing this with others, be it your sales team, your line manager, or your agency, start to get into those kinds of conversations, because once you start seeing a real output here that is positive, it becomes quite infectious. It becomes quite exciting because it's different. It really is different to what a lot of us have been doing. And if we can then start to use our models like the 5 Cs that I've just introduced you to, or some of the other models that you might already have in your existing systems and processes, use those with a responsible messaging lens. Just go in and have a little look, critique them, and then start to make these little incremental improvements. 1% here, 1% there is way better than trying to reinvent everything. You don't want to rock the boat, but at the same time, you do want to rock the boat. So it's about balance. And of course, avoiding the most common pitfalls through this new awareness and improvements to your process. And this is why I keep saying, and I've said it in a number of different ways, you can't necessarily do this alone. So if this has been of interest to you and you kind of think, okay, we've got to now start using this as a layer or a filter, or this kind of thing that sits above everything we do, just as a sort of a sense check really on how we behave with our customer interactions, then make sure that everybody else buys into this. So maybe this is something you take to the next team meeting, or maybe you create a little sort of mini webinar, or you take copies of these slides. Please do, take copies of these slides and kind of just sort of almost represent them, if you like, to your teams and to your colleagues. Just let them know that this is an opportunity. It may be right, it may be you have to translate stuff because of the way that you operate or the industry that you're in, but that is fine. And starting small by checking each and everything you do before it goes live against these kinds of checklists, against this kind of a filter, is a really important way to start building the momentum and also the confidence in others, really, that this is the right way of doing business. And as I say, I will almost guarantee you that this will build this really kind of irresistible momentum that will actually help you to just get better and better, not just in your own eyes, knowing it's the right thing to do, but also in your customers' eyes, which is really, really key. So some final reflections here to wrap this up, this whole idea of responsible messaging in social media. I've got 3 questions here to ask you, and these will be ones to take away and kind of reflect upon as you kind of hopefully begin this journey now, or if you're already on the journey, maybe start to reflect on how far you've come already. The first question is, what does responsibility look like for your brand? How could your brand look, feel, and act differently if it was more and more and increasingly more responsible? Second question is, have you seen good or bad examples that really stood out? And of course, you can look outside your industry, you can look at your competitors, you can look at what you've done, but certainly reflecting on examples that you want to avoid and things maybe you want to emulate because they are just so good. Oh, that brand there, look, they got it right. There's no harm in following best practice. It's probably what we should all be doing because collectively we can make this whole thing a better place if we do. And the final question is, what process could you start using this week or even later today to improve your content approach? Maybe it's just one little thing, or maybe it's one process, maybe it's one reflection, or maybe it is just starting an audit to see how you're doing right now. And then you can use that as the basis for building an approach to responsible messaging, not only in social media, but more broadly as well. Because as I said right at the outset, if you do this within social media, one of those most public kind of platforms that you can be a communicator in, this is going to play out internally in your organization, throughout your website, and pretty much in everything that you do as a professional. To me, there's no better way of doing messaging. Being responsible is the future, and it will make for a better place, a better sector, and hopefully, ultimately, a better planet too.